Well, it's about that time. Welcome. It's week 6. Here we are. This is the Low Car Fantasy Football League Week 6 podcast. We're going to get started here. We got a big week. Been quite the day. Maybe not the day. Maybe quite the last hour. And we're going to jump right in. We're going to talk about it. We're going to go get into everything. And so, as we do, I think the best place to start, not really best, worst, first, who cares? Let's start with our newest member of the league. He has come in guns blazing, making trades, kind of kickstarting a lot of movement in the league this year. We have to first find out what's he thinking about the craziness that are Paul trades and whether or not he can compete with all the movement that happens in this league. So, Mr. Sullivan, welcome. You've never made an appearance on this before. You have attended drafts before your membership. Now that you started to see what it really looks like, are you scared?
I'm definitely not scared. It's exciting. My other league is not doesn't do as much trading, and so this definitely adds some more excitement than the other one. And I'm interested to see, the dynasty going forward. I've never done a dynasty league, and I think it also adds some strategy for this year and next year with the reset. Just one thing I wanted to talk about today.
Oh, we can definitely get into it. Yeah, it's as you can see, and you I'm sure you were gathering to some extent that there's been a debate the last few years about just the way the league is structured. In a way, encourage teams early on to essentially tank or punt on the season and look at asset acquisition. Is that good for the league? Is that good for what we're doing? There are obviously various camps and opinions and arguments on that. I think you sort of dove headfirst into it. A lot of this should kind of go away next year because when there's no keeper value and you have a total reset coming, you really can't. We're not going to, I think, allow draft pick trading, but you have to completely reevaluate how you make offers. And also this year, right?
Yeah. Has that been decided? I know during the draft we were discussing about capping the value or the number of trades, and I know La Magna was pretty against trades next year.
I would be, as the commissioner, I try to stay out of advocating one way or another on most issues. If people want to have trades of some variety, I think if that's what the overwhelming consensus is in terms of moving to dynasty, okay. I don't think it is a good idea, but if people want to be able to trade like an 8th round pick, I mean, I'm not going to stop them. But I do think that if you want to focus on parity or at least the ability for people to come out of a draft with potential parity, you need to either prevent entirely or heavily restrict picks. Anyway, we don't need to have a 10 or 20-minute conversation on that. I think it's more so.
Yeah. So I think I agree that there's going to be very few trades next year just because no one's also going to know the value of people who maybe are competing for a championship or playoffs next year. There's a real cost of trading away your dynasty picks that people probably don't. It's hard to account for, and so. Yeah, but I think the opposite is true this year, where this year you could trade away, you could go for a championship, really go all in, trade away first through pick 5, and you will only suck for 1 year.
That was my approach last season. I mean, at the draft, I basically had no early picks. I won a championship, but that was a strategy decision of I'm going to be terrible this season or likely terrible. I'm all in. Not everybody goes down that road, but that's a strategy, and I think it's one that look. There's no guarantee of anything, but part of this is you've got to try to increase your odds, and that's one way to do that. So,
But I think this year is even more. The cost is even lower because you could go all in. If there wasn't going to be a reset, you could go. If you went all in this year, you might be bad for multiple years. It might take multiple years to rebuild. Now you can be go all in this year, and you will only be bad for 1 year. And so we've seen some people do some trades already for draft picks. So usually, I tried to get draft picks so that I could, accumulate assets to be better next year. I'm not sure everyone on this call did the same thing, which we can talk about. But, if you're someone like Beads or Eric or Wagner, who've already started trading away picks, they definitely, the cost of so they're going to be probably less competitive next year. And so I imagine that they would probably be willing to spend their other draft capital if it improves their chances.
Well, that's always I think the question, the internal debate people have. I mean, you've certainly acquired a lot of assets for next year, and we can jump into that. In terms of, I mean, I'll get your reaction first. I mean, obviously, I made 2 trades today. You can look at them together. You can look at them individually. You can analyze them from multiple perspectives. But, what's your take? What's your thoughts on what I did? I thought my team had a ceiling, and I made moves that, they're not both future moves. They're not both win now moves. They're sort of hand in hand. But I'm open to, discussion. I think it's worth having. I think people want us to talk about it. So.
Yeah. So when I looked at the league and like who I thought were the top players, top owners, top teams, I thought that I had you at like maybe number 6 or 5 or 6, somewhere in there. I thought you had a really solid team with your wide receiver room and Jaden Daniels. Obviously you were thin to having really thin at running back. And so I thought that you would be a buyer. So I was actually shocked when you put everyone on the trading block yesterday or 2 days ago. And like, to me, it was like, oh, if you spend a couple picks for next year, you could get good running backs, and you are right in there. So I want to get to analyzing your picks, or sorry, your trades, because I don't understand the one with Magna, but I guess why did you decide to put everyone up for a trade and shake things up as opposed to buying running backs?
I think it's a fair question. I went all in last year, and I was very reluctant to have 2 seasons essentially in a row where I would be going into the draft with significantly negative capital. But really what happened is when I looked around the league and I looked at the other teams that I felt like were buyers. And so when I go and for example, if I look at your team, if I look at, Wagner's team, I will look at Drew's team, those are 3 examples. I look at your team and I go, there really aren't running backs there that I love. And I know you made me an offer that just didn't get the blood flowing for me. You offered Gainwell and Jalen Warren for Tyler Algier and like a 3rd round pick. And it's just not like enough. Is that a big enough needle mover for me? I don't see it. I get it. You're probably looking, hey, if I make that deal, you're going to turn around and try to flip Algier to Paul for like a 6th rounder, which we can talk about that player because he was slandered in some negotiations that fell through. So, but for example, I looked around the league and I said, okay, if I'm going to go get running backs, who has running backs that I would want to spend a high capital for? Wagner's team, I mean, frankly, there's not a player I want on the team. Maybe Devontae Adams, maybe Tucker Kraft, but there's basically not a player I'd want, and definitely not a running back. He's got Devin Singletary, Tyrone Chasey, Brian Robinson Jr. I'm not spending anything for that. For Drew, I did have some conversation with Drew about Derrick Henry, but frankly, Henry's been a disappointment, and really, that's a hard to commit to. And so when I looked around the league, I went, I just don't love what I have. Now, I was in discussion with other owners who I thought had good competitive teams, but I didn't love the player enough to spend like a second-round pick. And so I looked at it and I went, look, I'm not going to convince Paul to trade me McCaffrey or Bijan. That's not going to happen. I did think he was a seller when he made those two deals back to back. The first one I saw indicated he might be selling because he was 1-3, and I, sort of was willing to make that big monster offer. Of course, then he was not a seller; he was a buyer. And so, looking around the league, there's not a lot of options for me to make a big move in the running back market. I did try to go after Omarion Hampton a week before Manny traded for a quarterback. And in fact, I offered Jaden Daniels in a multiplayer deal each way. And I wanted Hampton and Worthy. Now, of course, Hampton goes out, gets hurt, gets placed on IR. Worthy didn't practice today. So, Manny, that might be one of those things that he kicking himself for. So I did look around, but I didn't love there wasn't like high-end guys. Matt's not trading James Cook. I'm not going to get Bijan. I'm not going to get McCaffrey. I'm not going to get Barkley. So I don't have a lot of opportunity to get better. I drafted really well at receiver. I know that I'm probably too good to be the worst team in the league.
Who
So
are you most excited to draft
next year?
No, who are you most excited that you got in this past draft?
I was happy that I landed with. I was happy with where I landed with Ibuka because I wanted. But here's the thing: I wanted a rookie receiver because our league goes early on rookies. But that doesn't mean I'm going to live with the guy forever. We've got one more keeper season. It's not like I'm going to have him guaranteed for the next 4 or 5 years to where there's a much higher value placed on him. Plus, his room is injured on his own team. That's not also what he's doing is likely not sustainable. All that aside, we can talk about the Ibuka trade, but in terms of running backs, where your question was, that's how I surveyed the landscape. And so I said, okay, if my best case is like sneaking into the playoffs as a 6th seed and losing in the first round, is that really like what I want to do? Or can I maybe get an asset or two and live to fight another day next season? I think I did that. Look, I don't love the deals, but you usually don't fall in love with it. You are happy enough. I think there's positives in each deal, and I'm happy to talk about the Ibuka one and get into all that. But
let's start with, I think, so thank you for explaining that. I guess you're right that it's risky. You maybe have to extend capital for next year, and you don't end up with a great RB room. But I definitely think, I was surprised. So, but I didn't do a deep dive to try to explore those options. I thought the Garrett Wilson trade made sense. You're getting a 3rd rounder. That's basically like what I got for Drake London. So that seems, like on par. And what you're doing there is you're getting, a draft asset. Now, one of the things that surprised me is that your trade with LaMagna didn't include any picks. So then I'm thinking to myself, Ibuka versus Nico Collins, you have to give up, I think, a pretty much an equivalent round to them, and it's not clear. I think they're both like six rounders you have to give up for them. Maybe 6 and a 7. I forget. But they're both. Unless you really think, do you think Ibuka is like really at his ceiling and is gonna really come down, crashing down to earth when Evans and Godwin are back? So to me, it's like maybe you're indifferent. You're either I might be indifferent between Nico Collins and Ibuka, but if I'm trading, I'm trying to get something else to make me better for next year. So that's one question I had about that. So how were you evaluating it?
So, I mean, that's fair. And I did, and Matt can vouch for this, I did try to extract more out of this deal. We went back and forth. He held firm at this as, this is the offer. I did ask for picks, including, mid-round type picks, not, or even late round picks for that matter. We looked at this from 3 different trade value charts. 2 charts said I was getting more value. 1 chart said he was getting more value. So that indicates that it's relatively equal in terms of current season projections. We can quibble over whether we think, we agree or not with that, but at least on its face for this season. Now, Nico Collins and Egbuka are both 6-round keepers next year, so their keeper value is equal. I do think their ceilings are, if not equal. I do think Nico has a higher potential ceiling. I don't think Egbuka can keep this up because most of his touchdowns are coming on these very deep ball, kind of broken play or weird things where guys are falling over each other or whatever. The long touchdown against the Eagles jumps out in my mind of that's not a sustainable model. Now, the targets are sustainable potentially, but is all of the production sustainable? So I think Nico's sort of at his floor and he can go up. And I think Egbuka, you're trying to sell high. For my team, in doing this deal, Jaden Daniels is not a guaranteed starter for me given the McLaurin injury and the issues on that offense and his knee. And LaMagna doesn't have to start Jaden Daniels because he has Stafford. But by doing both deals, I get a second quarterback. So I don't look at it. I have to evaluate parts of the deal in that sense. I think ultimately, in looking at my team, I needed a running back. And so I tried to extract running backs in various offers. I tried to get a running back included in the Garrett Wilson trade. That didn't happen. Jordan Mason isn't exactly your elite running back, but at least it gives me a compliment on my team, and I needed to make my team a little bit more well-rounded instead of having such a negative at one position. So that's sort of how I looked at it. I would have loved to have gotten more, 100%. I made it clear to the league. I reached out individually to owners that I thought could benefit from my receivers. I put players on the block. I made it clear that I was open for business. I got different offers from different people. I had conversations, some very lengthy, a lot of back and forth. This is the offer that ultimately was the best for my team and for what I was looking for. I've always would want more value, but at the end of the day, I could have not made the deal and then made the Garrett Wilson trade or some variation of it and had no running back to benefit from all of this, which only would have hurt my team in terms of the rest of this year. So I had to make a move that I felt like at least if I'm not going to truly compete for a title, because I don't think I have that kind of talent before or after the trades, maybe I can win the consolation bracket, get the number 1 pick. Like there are other things to shoot for. And that was my thought process. And I'm happy to talk through some of the other offers and conversations that I had because, I do think that provides some context that, people may have interest in, but that's how I saw it. So
yeah, I guess I'm glad you didn't get picks. So that means more picks. That there's gonna be more like evenly dispersed talent next year. So
I mean, yeah, for you that's beneficial, right?
yeah.
The
So
problem for you is it's the Paul
Garrett
problem.
Wilson.
No.
Well, I'm not Paul.
Well, that's what we hope, right?
Yeah.
If you can't win with 3 first-round picks, as has
I
happened,
only have 2 first round
I,
picks.
I'm just saying he's had 3
Yeah.
first-round picks before and not won it. So,
Yeah.
you know,
So I guess it's just we can move on to something else in a minute,
yeah.
but the trades seem at odds with each other in that Garrett Wilson, you're getting an asset for next year, but then with the trade um, with LaMagna, it doesn't seem like that's built for next year.
So I guess the question that I have is, am I not allowed to have a win-win situation where I acquire a future asset for a player that frankly is probably outperforming his rank given other run receiver situations and try to upgrade my team in this season, or do I have to focus on either being a buyer or a seller?
Um, I guess if you're, it depends on it. It just doesn't. It doesn't seem. It seems like you could have increased your chances next year by even if you swap Egbuka with for Collins, not getting picks, some other picks, or maybe a pick for Daniels or something like that. Or it seems like, yeah.
Look, I 100% could have waited, gotten closer to the deadline, tried to find someone more desperate and take advantage. 100%, I could have done that. I look at these deals kind of together in a sense because essentially I traded away 4 players to get 5 plus a third round pick. So, you know, I'm essentially trading 3 receivers to get 3 receivers. I'm trading a quarterback to get a quarterback. Plus, I get a running back who's a starter and a third round pick. So that if you that obviously is a more simplistic view. Um, so that's a future asset that's beneficial. Plus, there's potentially benefit this year. I don't know. Like next week, Ibuka could go off against the 49ers for 30 points, and I look really dumb. Um,
Yeah.
you
So
know,
then,
so
yeah.
I'm not gonna we could play that game in a month or at the end of the year. My thought process was I looked at them somewhat together. I could have made. I mean, the La Magna deal was on the table for days. I could have done that Tuesday. I didn't because I wanted to see what else I might be able to materialize. Um, and the Wilson deal in its fashion came together today because of a lot of back and forth and trying to look at what could that component be. um it's open for, I think, criticism or debate. I don't think that the Ibuka trade is some imbalanced set of player swaps, but I can understand why people would be disappointed or upset because it benefits one team. At least on paper it looks like it might benefit someone in the short term. um, but I just don't, I don't know that that's always the case. So I get it, and I understand why people would want to see me get more value. But like I said, Nico Collins is the same keeper value. So like, what are we like? That's really not that much of a discrepancy, at least long term. Meaning next year. So
Yeah.
I guess let me ask you this. This is what I kind of wanted to do. I'll throw some of the other offers I received at you, and you tell me if you think that was a better offer. Because I'm always curious for alternative perspectives. If that interests you, I'm happy to give you a peek into what I was considering, or maybe not considering.
Well, I guess it also just like we need to think about if those were their best and final on those two, because you were saying like La Magna wasn't going to go any higher on those, but like, did you leave? I'm assuming you got as close as most as you could out of them. So, but
Yeah,
I don't know that that's true.
I mean, I didn't, tell owner, this is what the offers are, but I mean, I was
Yeah.
asking for and making it clear what I wanted.
Yeah.
For example, just to make it clear, for example, what Paul was offering me was Egbuka and a 4th-round pick for AJ Brown and a 3rd-round pick, or Egbuka and a 5th-rounder for Zay Flowers and a 3rd, or Egbuka and a 6th for Olave and a 3rd. I made it clear from the outset, if we're talking about Egbuka as the only player in a deal, in a 1-for-1 player deal, he's not coming with the pick. He's way better than any of those 3 players. And that was a red line. If the offer is solely Egbuka, he's not getting a pick added to him, certainly not close to the pick that you'd be sending back. That wasn't going to happen. And I was very clear about that in each of those, for each of those offers. I think the closest offer that I had to consider was Egbuka, Isaiah Davis, who's very much a non-factor in the deal, Tyler Algier for Bucky Irving, Rashad White, and Zay Flowers. This is how this deal was pitched to me.
Mm-hmm.
Algier and Isaiah Davis are throwaway players. So the owner with Bijan Robinson is trying to convince the owner of the handcuff that he's a throwaway. I'm not that dumb. I'm not going to fall for that. And I was told that Bucky Irving and Rashad White combined is a receiver 1. The problem there is I'm only going to play one of them, and one guy's hurt. And, what Rashad White did last week against a bad defense is not indicative of what he's going to do 2 weeks from now, if he's even the starter. And I don't want Zay Flowers, and I certainly don't want him with no Lamar Jackson. So, and I made it clear that deal, that 3-for-3 wasn't close. And that either, it needed to be an AJ Brown for Zay Flowers. That was my stance. There was a lot of back and forth on various.
And you didn't want. I can see AJ Brown's had a horrible year, and so.
Yep.
That, I wouldn't have done. If you take AJ Brown, you're basically trying. Obviously, you can't keep him, so you're trying to then flip him later for another pick.
I have to hope
so that he turns around and then you try to flip him to someone else.
I mean, I was told that this owner was very content with their roster, that they felt like AJ Brown was their receiver 4, and they were just looking for some kind of receiver upgrade. I was given a lot of reasons that I didn't believe that they believed, because if you're approaching me for a top 3 player at their position, why are you trying to convince me that you don't need to make the deal? That didn't make sense to me. And I was clear about what I would have needed in that deal, because the Bucky Irving, Rashad White component is essentially one player. You're not playing both of those guys. So you can't trade me that and say, well, this is an RB1. No, you're really making a 2-player trade where you're trying to extract a handcuff for a top 3 running back and an elite receiver without giving up really much value other than this concept of an RB1. So if that's the offer that I'm weighing against the La Magna offer, when I've made my position clear, that's the difficulty is, okay, so if that's what I'm getting, I don't know, right? Maybe I could have gone to Jacobs and said, hey, I'll give you Egbuka instead of Wilson, but then that has to go be a higher pick, and that starts to get more complicated, and that takes the La Magna deal off the table. So at some point, I had to make a decision of, am I doing 1 deal or 2 deals, and what does that look like in terms of trying to line everything up?
Yeah.
So again, I'm just trying to provide context. Somebody else may have a different perception or evaluation of what was on the table, but that's what I was presented with. And again, there was a lot of back and forth with each of these 3 different owners on all sorts of different potential trades.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, with the JSN trade, I was basically getting 2nd round offers. And to him, for me, he is a keeper for next year. It's like I think it's a 5th rounder. So I was like, I'm not doing it for a second round. I want either another pick or a player that I could keep, and so that's why I ended up doing the Paul trade on that one, because I think it also just gives me more capital for next year, and so that's why I'm just thinking about your trades in terms of from that lens, to be like, you're doing, like you said, you're kind of trying to do both, where you're trying to be relevant this year and next year, but you have to draft well again next year.
Yeah, look, I felt very confident I wasn't going to win the league. So it became a question of what makes the most sense this year, next year. Your JSN trade, I thought,
you didn't like it.
I don't, just because
so
I don't like Chase Brown. I don't think you got enough. Like, as crazy as it sounds, for what you got, a 2nd rounder, and Chase Brown has keeper value, but I don't think you got enough, because JSN on that offense gets like half the targets. They don't throw it a lot, but they basically only throw it to him. And I mean, Mike Evans, when he's healthy, he's obviously a starter. And so you gave up, I thought, a lot. I would have almost said you're not giving up any pick, or you need like a 1, because you're giving essentially a receiver 1 and a receiver, and then another guy who's a receiver 2. And Chase Brown this year, because of the Burrow injury, I mean, really it's circumstance related, he's not been that good. And I get it. Your team wasn't off to a good start. You have good assets. You need to make a deal. I don't fault you for making the trade. I would be doing the same thing. I just felt like there was more value there. But again, and I think I told you at the time, like, that's the deal that you go and you shop, because I don't know that, like, I give you a 1st because of my receiver situation, but I might be willing to give you, I don't even know, right? Because we didn't have the conversation, but you might be willing to get different players, or players you might like more, if you start looking around and say, okay, this is a really big potential deal. Now, obviously,
so I had 2 other offers that were both, I think, 2nd round picks, but no. So that's like, what Paul also offered. But I guess when I looked at the other rosters, and there was no one, and I preferred Chase Brown over other people who I thought that they would part with. I didn't make those counters, but for, I guess, how I'm valuing it is Chase Brown will be like, next year could be an RB3 for me, like on my bench, but a really solid one. And so that's really like I'll have depth there. And I'm basically trusting that this year has a really low production because of Burrow, and that next year when Burrow's back, or another year under Flacco, that that they'll be humming. And so I guess I'm making a bet there.
Yeah, I get it. I don't think it's not so inequitable that you go, oh my God, what happened? But I just felt like there's probably some meat on the bone somewhere, but you don't know. And I think when you have multiple offers to weigh, you got to go with the best one that you feel good about. And if that's what that one was, I think that's fine. I really like the other trade. Getting McMillan and a 2nd and 3rd for, Kenneth Walker and Drake London are good players, but I thought that was like, you aced that trade in my book.
And I flipped McMillan for a 5th, so 2nd,
right.
3rd,
you flip McMillan for a 5th. I did hear that the owner involved in that trade today or yesterday, whenever it was, did not even realize that they had that offer was still out there, and so you really kind of benefit in that sense.
Well, okay. I was holding out for a fourth, and then you put all your wide receivers on
Oh,
and I was like, oh fuck. And so I was trying to get a fourth, and then I was like, um, I did, I had a suspicion that this deal, I wanted to like counter it, but I was like, oh no, then they might remember that it's out there. So maybe that's,
yeah. Look, that team. I mean, that team looks pretty good. Not gonna lie. I tried to extract Travis Etienne. I was
yeah,
like, if we're talking Igbuka, like we can get real creative. That
yeah,
team has 3 good running backs. It's got 3 good receivers. It's got a good tight end, good quarterback. I mean, Jacobs has really been very smart. Yeah, he's traded 3 of his first 5 picks, but that's a roster to be concerned about if you're one of these other contending teams. So he did a good job. You did a good job. I think if you acquire a player in that kind of deal and then flip him and you get more value, you're benefiting so much. Um, and so sorry to have scared you out of potentially getting a 4th round pick, but I mean, you've got enough assets. I'm not going to lose
yeah,
that.
yeah. I was like, oh, if he has one more, I was like, if he has one more good week, I could get a fourth. And then I was like, oh no, your wide receivers are on the market. I better, because I also thought that you would be, um, I think we both had a lot of assets. And then I don't know how many other people would be in a similar position. And so, to be sellers, but I also know that, how many more, people are gonna buy, or like, and
Yeah,
so
I
then
think
I was like, the trade market could dry up, or especially the other people who maybe who are gonna look to sell, in the next couple of weeks, they might have one or two really good players, and then no one's gonna be interested in my. So I was like, I just got to make this now.
it's also tough because you're coming in where you don't have as much institutional knowledge as other people do. Like there are other owners that are competitive that are not big traders, right? So knowing that you're like, well, I could try to make a deal, but I might have to overpay, or I don't love the player. You kind of have to compromise somewhere. I think that makes it difficult. And then there's other teams that might feel good right now and they don't want to get involved in that kind of bidding war. I look at certain teams. I look at Eric. I mean, he could certainly afford to upgrade, at receiver. But then you look at his bench, and CeeDee Lamb and Rashee Rice are going to be there in a few weeks, so he's not feeling rushed to make a move, even though you might go, oh yeah, I don't know about Jalen Waddle or something, but he's 2 or 3 weeks from having a much stronger lineup, and so he's not going to feel that pressured into making a deal. Um, I think Manny, he traded for Baker. Great deal. He's got a really strong lineup. He hit on Quentin Johnson. Um, his keepers of Puka and Kyron have been great. So I think it's hard. You have to read the market well, and um, it is what it is. Like I said, I could have held out and hoped for more, and that's how that goes sometimes. But I'm excited to see we brought in an active owner, right? You've come in, you're willing to make trades,
Yeah.
make waves. So I know you got to run and get the kids in a second. So give you some parting thoughts. We'll wrap it up here. Take it wherever you want to go. You can criticize my commissionership as much as you'd like. We won't. There's no personal vendettas.
um, no, it's been great so far. I'm sorry I missed you guys in Asheville. Asheville is one of my favorite towns. I went to grad school at UVA, and it's not too far, and so I made it down there a few times when I was in Charlottesville. So I'm looking forward to, the draft in person next year.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see where we end up. You
Yeah.
know, that's one of
Uh,
the fun things about doing
yeah.
this.
yeah, I started the year thinking I potentially get to choose where the draft would be, and now I'm trying to not be winless. But yeah.
Don't
That's all right.
worry, you can beat Wagner. You can get a win. So,
Um,
well, I appreciate you joining the league. I think you've been a very good addition. Like we said, we want active participating folks. Whether it doesn't mean you've got to be, um, making moves all the time. But if you're just participating, you're active, whether it's in the chat or in the trades, things like that. I think it helps. So we're excited. We're happy to have you. Certainly, you're going to be the quote unquote team to beat going into the draft next year.
yeah,
So you better start
yeah.
stepping up.
So I'm a federal employee, so my trades benefited from being partially furloughed. So um, that was a good timing for me.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that'll get resolved soon, and you'll be able to get back to work. And
Yeah, yeah, awesome. All right, take care.
yeah. All right, well, I appreciate it.